Hello everybody, it's Claire here from Sewing by Claire, and today we're going to be working on another Lunar Lapin outfit from the Making the Lunar Lapin book, and today we are making Alfie's jeans, which is in this book just here. So if you're a new subscriber to my channel, then welcome. I'm going to say my name is Claire, but I've already said that bit. I make tutorials and sewing tutorials for beginners and improver sewists. And for the moment we've been concentrating on the Lunar Lapin doll, which is a stuffed toy, which is like this one here. And there's a whole series of videos on my channel of how to make Lunar Lapin in either a linen or a quilting weight cotton, and that's different from the way that the designer has originally made it, because originally, and with all of the kits, then Lunar Lapin is made out of felt, but I prefer the feel of the linen and the quilting cotton, so that's why I changed it. And also the original Lunar Lapin is hand stitched, and I've shown you how you can machine stitch it. So have a look at my other videos on my channel, and if that's of interest to you, of how to make the actual character. On the last video that I uploaded, we made the waistcoat, which is for Alfie. It's actually being sported here by Wilhelmina Mouse, another character in the series, and we've done a video on how to make Wilhelmina's head and embroider that. But today, if you look at your Making Lunar Lapin book 1, then on page 58 and 59 you'll see the trousers there for the jeans for Alfie, and we're going to be making those. So it's page 64 and 65 are the instructions, and then if you turn to page 130 and 131, then you've got your pattern pieces there. So I'm just going to pop on in a minute and to show you the completed article, so that you can decide if you think that my sewing's up to scratch and that you want to make something like I do. So I'll pop that up just now. So just pop back just to show you the finished trousers. So I've actually put a mock fly on the front here and used a contrast orange thread. We've got the nicely stitched back pockets there. That looks a bit funny. We've got a hole for the Luna or the character's tail to pop out of at the back. And then we've got the trouser legs, and then I've done decorative stitching, or orange stitching on the bottom of the legs there, just to look like jeans as well. So that's what we're going to be making, and if you want to make your own pair of these, then carry on watching the video, because this is how we do it. So hopefully the trousers are something that you'd like to make for your character. Obviously they can be unisex. They are called Alfie's jeans in the book, but obviously you can make them unisex in any fabric that you want to at all. So the pattern's on page 130 and page 131 in my book, and you need to trace off 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. So if you get your tracing paper out or your baking paper out, and you trace those off from out of the book, and you'll be left with some pattern pieces like these. So let me just tilt you down towards my work table, because we'll be working from there from this point onwards, and we'll get started on these trousers. So just a little disclaimer for this video. We live in an apartment and here in southern Spain, and there's work going on in the apartment above us. So if you do hear any random knocks or bangs or drilling, then I'll try and edit those out, but just to let you know that it's out of my control, unfortunately. I have been waiting all week to film this, just hoping that they'd have a quiet day, but so far they haven't. So I'm going to go for it, because I can get this uploaded ready for, it's Friday today, so I get this uploaded for you ready for the weekend, for anybody who's doing any weekend stitching. Okay, so we need to trace off our pattern pieces, and the reason why I said that we've got 4 pattern pieces, we've got an upper leg and a lower leg, Alfie's jeans pocket and Alfie's jeans waistband as well. So those are the 4 pieces that we've got. However, what we need to do is we need to join these 2 trouser pieces here. Now I've left a little extra, just about 1 centimetre extra of tissue paper on the top of my lower leg pattern piece, because then that's much easier than to put one on top of the other and to join that together with some sellotape, without having to worry about getting it exactly right on the on the cut join there. So when you look at your pattern here, we've got 1 pattern piece over this side and the other over here, and it says join to lower leg before cutting 2, and again join to upper leg before cutting 2. So that's what we're going to do now. So let me get my sellotape and join this together, and then hopefully, because it wasn't getting too fast, what I don't want you to do is to think that these 2 pieces need to be cut out separately, because you've got to join this on your pattern piece, because it's as one when we actually cut it out, just to make that clear. And if you're new to working with patterns, that might not be so obvious, so that's why I'm just covering that off straight from the beginning, that we need to stick this together with sellotape or with glue, whatever you've got, or you can just pin it along the edge if you've not got any sellotape to hand, just so long as you cut this pattern piece out in one complete part, the upper and the lower leg together. The other thing when you're tracing this out is you might trace out this part with Alfie's jeans lower leg, and then you can see the pattern piece for the pocket is inside it. The pocket isn't actually situated on that part of the leg, so I've cut out my lower leg complete and ignored that pattern piece on there, but then I've then gone back with a separate piece of pattern of tracing paper, and I've traced that out separately. So don't think that you need to trace it out with the pattern in front there. They've just used it to save space onto the same page, so make sure you cut that piece out as a separate pattern piece. Okay, so now that we've got our 3 pattern pieces now, because we've joined the upper and the lower leg together, we've got the pocket and we've got Alfie's jeans. And what we're going to do now is we're going to choose our fabric. Now, you could make this in a denim if you wanted to, but I would try and use a lightweight denim if you can. Another alternative to look out for a lightweight denim is something called a chambray. Now, chambray is quite a soft fold, and quite often denim shirts are made out of chambray because it's much softer to use and easier. You won't get too bulky. When you're starting to turn up small hems and then have to stitch those down, then a bulky denim on that small amount can be quite fiddly to work with because it tends to bounce out again. Likewise, on the bottom of the waist facing, when we get to that, we're going to have to turn up a small amount and press it. And as I say, a cotton fabric, I know denim's a cotton fabric, but it's a thick cotton fabric, and something a little bit thinner will work. So just bear that in mind when you're choosing your fabrics. I'm going to use this grey fabric that I've got that matched the waistcoat that we made, so Alfie's going to be matching in his 2 things, but use whatever you want to for your fabric. This is a quilting weight cotton, which is very nice to use, and I do use a quilting weight cotton in a lot of my clothing because it is just so nice to use and robust. It holds a crease really well. So what we're going to do is pay attention to our pattern, which is cut 2 on this leg, cut 2 on the pocket, and cut 2 on the facing. Now, if you have been working with your Lunar Lapin pattern and you've made her out of felt, you've not had to worry about the orientation of the pattern pieces on the fabric, because felt doesn't have a one-way only to cut. You can cut it a whole number of ways. It doesn't have a grain of fabric like a woven fabric does, such as your quilting cotton. And on quilting cotton, we know that because it frays, and it either frays north to south or east to west, depending on which way the fabric's been cut, and it'll fray on both of those orientations. So we just need to pay attention to that. We've already cut some pieces out of this for the waistcoat, but what we're going to do is we're going to fold our fabric over, because I'm going to cut 2 in one go, 2 pieces. And what we need to do is pay attention to the fold line. We need it to be wide enough to fit the trousers on, and that piece is, so we can cut those 2 out, and I'll just reduce that slightly just so that we're not wasting fabric. We do try to, or I try to, save as much fabric as I can do when I'm sewing. Obviously it's up to you and how much fabric you have available to you. So what I'm just trying to do here is just try and start and get this fold line right for cutting out this pattern piece. Because what we need is, on this fabric we haven't got a clear right side or a wrong side, but if we were working with a fabric, say we did for the lining, which is this one here, there's a very clear right side to the fabric and a wrong side to the fabric. So when we cut 2 out and they're on a fold here and we've got a fold in the fabric, we know we're going to get 2 copies where the left and the right will both have the same side up. There's a video on my channel called Mirroring Pattern Pieces, and it's really important to understand this, especially if you've been working with felt before but you're now working with fabric. Because if you cut out, like you have done, cut out on the single for your fabric, and you cut out one pattern piece like this and there's a right side and a wrong side, you have to then flip your pattern piece over to cut out the second piece to get a mirrored copy. Otherwise you'll end up with 2 rights or 2 lefts. I go into this quite a lot of detail in a lot of my videos, but oh, they've got a flaw in the fabric there. That's interesting. Okay, just spotted that thread. I thought it was a loose thread, but it's a flaw in my fabric. So I need to avoid that. So I'll probably start at the other end just so that we can miss that out. I don't want that in my trousers. Sorry. So look at mirroring the pattern pieces, because if you fold the fabric over, you automatically get two cut out, left and a right, because of the way the fabric is folded. But if you cut yours out on a single, then you need to cut one with the pattern writing up and one with the pattern writing down to give you those two mirrored copies. If ever you've cut it out and it's not quite worked properly, that'll be one of the main things, because this pattern piece isn't symmetrical, because the pattern piece goes higher at the back here and it's lower at the front. Okay, so avoiding the flaw that I've just found in my fabric, I'm going to start and work from this side. And we are going to put all of our pattern pieces the same way. So they're all going to go north to south, or they're all going to go east to west. North to south along the selvage edge, which is the bound edge of your fabric. Sometimes it looks like this on your fabric. That's the selvage edge where the fabric has been rolled onto the machines ready for printing or for weaving the fabric. And we usually run our pattern pieces alongside the selvage edge, such as this. So what I'm going to do now, and I've got a check on here, so if you've got a larger check than this, you might want to do some pattern matching. Line up your pattern and put a mark on your pattern where one of your main pieces of check are, and then match your second piece up. When you turn it over, you can see your tracings through it to match your pattern up through the pattern piece. But for this one, we've got quite a nice light check. What I'm going to do is go along to the edge here, and I'm just going to make sure that along this edge here, my lines don't go off at a diagonal, and they do slightly. So I'm going at the moment, because we've not finished placing this yet, so I'm going to choose one of the lines and just follow that all the way down, and that will help me make sure that my fabric is straight. So I'm just doing that now. Just use your fingers just to smooth the fabric out, just to make it so it's nice and flat underneath. And you can just follow that line down and just make sure that you're happy that it's not disappearing as you go down the pattern piece, because that will help everything stay straight. Okay, I'm happy with that. So the next thing we're going to do then is we are going to put our pattern piece onto our fabric. And if you haven't got a pattern on yours, still make sure, the other thing that you can do with a pattern piece when you are looking at it to make sure that it's straight, if I've got a tape measure, hold on one second, is that you measure from the top to the bottom. So you measure from your fold to the edge here, exactly 24 centimetres, back to the middle, exactly 24 centimetres, and then you go down to the bottom, and that's exactly 24 centimetres. So I know that to the selvage edge, this fabric is now straight of grain, it's now straight, and things don't twist off. On these smaller garments, you can argue that it's not quite as important to make sure you're straight of grain, but certainly when you trade up to be making children's or adult clothes, you're going to need to make sure that you're working on straight of grain when you cut out. If ever you've had a t-shirt and when you wash and iron it, the seams seem to twist inside and it won't lay flat on your ironing board. That's why, because it's been cut slightly off grain, and those sides then twist and warp when they're wearing, which is what you don't want. Obviously, it's not quite so important with a doll's clothing, but it is important on here. And we've got a straight edge, which is Alfie's, the bottom of Alfie's hem here. So I'm going to lie that straight on my pattern piece. If you haven't got a line to work to for your straight of grain, I'll get a ruler, then what you can do is at right angles to the hem, which is a straight hem, you can draw a line down the centre of your pattern piece, and the way we denote that is put an arrow at the top and the bottom and write grain next to it. So that gives us the grain line, and then just as we did it on the fabric, what we do then is we measure from the fold to that grain line. So that's going to be 13, but let me just move it across slightly because we've not got a lot of room on the other side. So we've got that at 13.5. Put a pin at the top just to hold that steady. And then we go down to the bottom of our grain line and we measure again whether we're 13.5 or not to make that straight. And there we go, straight of grain now. So I can be confident now that that jeans pattern now is straight of grain on there and the hem will all be matched up. So then we'll go round and put our pins into our pattern piece to hold it down, or you can use pattern weights and then draw around it, depends on which way you prefer to work. For me, I like the accuracy I feel I get when I pin my pattern pieces on. So just put a pin every couple of inches or so alongside the seam allowance. We don't pin into the garment at this stage. We will do later, but not at this stage. Just make sure your pins don't overlap your pattern edges, because when you're snipping, if you forget, then you'll damage the blades on your scissors. So just go around, just pin this onto the pattern piece. If you know how to pin onto your pattern pieces, then feel free to skip ahead. I won't know that you've skipped this bit and you don't need this bit of tutorial. But if you're new to actually sewing garments and sewing with pattern pieces, then sometimes it's useful to see how it all fits together. So there's our leg piece all put onto our pattern piece, then onto our fabric. The next thing we need then is we need our pocket, and again we're going to cut 2 of those. That's nice and handy. And we're also going to cut Alfie's jeans. So here I'm going to put the pattern piece underneath there so that we can match that nicely. And if you look, it's going the same orientation as the main trouser piece. Oh, I'm really pleased upstairs are being quiet at the moment with the building work, so that's good news. Right, oops. Just put a pin just at the end there, but I just need to be careful because it's too long. Okay, so let me just move these pins up. As you see, I try not to overlap the fabric because you can catch the pins if you're not careful when you're cutting out. Pins in the middle. Just there, and the curve of the waistband has got a gentle curve to it, so you do just need to pay attention to that. And we can just fit the pocket in just in that place just there, so that's what I will do as well. But what I can do to make sure that's straight of grain is I can fold a line down the middle from the point to the middle of the pocket, so just like that. And now I can place that onto a line. One of the checks, just choose one, make sure top and bottom is touching and fold it out. I need to go over slightly just because of it's quite tight for that pattern piece. There we go. And then again we're just going to pin that in place once we've got that settled. So go ahead and pin everything onto your fabric and paying attention to the layout of it, and then we'll be ready to cut out these pattern pieces, and then we'll get ready to get started on the sewing. So yeah, that's what it looks like once it's all pinned onto the pattern piece, onto the fabric, and I'll get cutting out. Okay, so here we have got our pattern pieces all cut out, and there's a couple of things that I want to do as quick tips and tricks. And if you've watched my channel before, you know that I love my tips and tricks to make sure that things stay straight and that you get the very best result possible. So the first thing we're going to do before we do anything else is we are going to mark our notches. Now notches are these little triangle symbols that you'll find on your pattern that you'll have copied across. And what we do is we take scissors or some little snips like these, and we just cut in at right angles through the centre of the notch and making a hole through a cut snip into both sides of the fabric there and through the pattern piece. So these are our little clues for when we're joining our pattern pieces together at the end, our fabric pieces. There's 2 there. There's some on the waistband here. And you literally just want a couple of millimetres. Don't go right through because you've only got a very small seam allowance on here. And if you go too far, you'll be cutting through into your seam allowance and you won't be able to hide it. So then there's corresponding, just move that pin because there's a corresponding notch there and there. And one just here on the waistband, so 3 on the waistband. And then also on the fold line of the pocket there are snips as well, so we mark those on. The next thing then that we're going to do is something called a tailor's tack. Now I've done these before on my channel. I'm a big fan of a tailor's tack, and what it does is it transfers this marking here onto the pattern piece for you. So what I will just do is just thread up with my contrasting coloured fabric thread. Now you can put a pin through at the match points, and you could use a pin like this, and you could have something called a friction pen, which is this one here, which is a heat erasable pen. And what you can do is put a pin through the piece, through your pattern piece on the point that you want to match, because we need to know where to place this pocket. And take that pin out, and then what you can do is you can lift your pattern piece back gently. You can see your pin is through your fabric, and then you can just draw a little mark exactly where that pin touches the fabric. The problem is that with friction pens, sometimes they don't come out of your work, and sometimes you can mark the right side of your fabric rather than the wrong side of your fabric, and it can just make it difficult to work with. So what have been encouraging everybody to do is just to learn a simple technique called a tailor's tack, and it's an age-old, I actually learnt at school, and that's a few years ago now, how to make these, but they really are your best friend. So you get a length of thread, contrast thread. I've doubled this over through a needle, and then at the point that you want to match, so this one's going to be the top of the pocket, you take a bite through on that point there going east to west, and you go through both sides of your fabric at the same time, and you leave a tail about an inch and a half long. You then take another bite through both sets of the fabric and the pattern piece, and you go north to south, and then pull your thread through and leave a loop. But this time you're going to be cutting through the loop, so you want it to be about the same length as your tail, and cut through the loop and then cut through your tail as well, so you've got this like tufty bit of thread. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to mark most of these pieces here. And I think if we mark the 2 top corners and then we mark the bottom point, I think with some luck that should be enough. I'm going to need some more thread. Hold on 1 second. It is quite thread hungry, so don't use your best thread for this. This is best used as just a cheap tacking thread. One of those bargain basement ones, isn't it, that you get, or one at a supermarket perhaps you can use for doing this. Oh, I've got a very long piece, and I probably didn't need quite as long as that for this, just doing this one. And then at the bottom here we're going to do the same thing, so through both layers of fabric. You can feel if you put your fingers there, you can feel when the needle has gone through. Leave a long tail again, and then north to south going through. Make sure you don't pull any of your other threads out. Cut through the loop and cut off the tail. So what you end up with is this like tufty piece of fabric. But what it's done is it's put the markings through both sides of the fabric for you on both pattern pieces, and it's very accurate as well. And then all we need to do then is we just lift back the pattern piece very carefully, because we don't want to pull out our thread, so just ease your pattern pieces away from your fabric. If it starts to pull, just put your finger on that point where your threads are in your fabric, and you'll be able to pull your pattern piece off. Fold this up a little bit more. I don't want to take the pattern piece right off because I've got another little trick to tell you in a second. And then what we do then is we then lift apart the 2 halves of our fabric. Now they're going to snag here where the points are, but we're going to pull that so that we've got just a small amount left here. We've got a bridge of threads. And when we've got the bridge of threads, we're then going to take our scissors and cut through the middle of that, because that leaves a tuft of fabric, a tuft of thread on this side and also a tuft of thread on this side. If you're already familiar with Tailor's Tacks, then you can just fast forward for this bit. But again, we've got the little bridge of threads there. Don't go too fast and be very careful that you don't snip through your fabric when you're cutting your threads. And then we know we've got another one here, so another bridge of threads, and then we're just going to snip through. And what that does is it's marked all of those exact points exactly the same on both pattern pieces. So again, symmetry is really important, isn't it? Because otherwise it takes our eye off. So what we've got then here is these fabrics, or these thread places all marked. What we also have on this fabric in particular is a very clear, an unclear right side and wrong side to the fabric. And I want to make sure that I use the right side all the time, or the same side each time. If you've got a fabric like this one, it doesn't matter so much, because you know that that's the wrong side of the fabric and that the pretty pattern side is the right side of the fabric. But on something like this, where it's very unclear, so all I do then is I take a pin and I just put it through double in the middle of that pattern fabric piece somewhere like this, and that will then tell me that that is the right side. And so because we folded this fabric together, we've got right sides together, so I know I can put a pin through both pattern pieces like that. This will then help me when we're working with the pattern pieces to make sure we've got the right orientation, if you like. So again, this is a pattern piece. There's no Tailor's Tacks to do on here. We've just marked our notches on the waistband. So again, I'm just going to ease those two pieces of fabric apart so I can see the inside, because that's our right side. And I'm just going to put that pin back in again on both pattern pieces to mark that that is the inside, that's the right side of my fabric. So that's those two marked up. And I do this before I take the pattern pieces off, because it's very easy to either get distracted or to forget where you are. And again, on this pocket here, just going to ease those two pieces apart. And it might be that your right side is on the outside, and that's fine. Just put your pin on whichever is the right side that you choose for your fabric. So denim has a clear right side and wrong side, doesn't it? Chambray maybe not, so you might need this little tip for chambray. So we now know which is the right side of all of our pattern pieces before we take those off. So I always keep my pattern pieces on my cut fabric pieces until it's time to use them. And the first thing we're going to be working with is our pocket. So if you want to get your pocket ready, and we can take these pins out completely now and take our pattern piece off and keep that somewhere safe. And then because we know that that's the right side, we can open this up and put it on our work surface or our cutting board, and we know that we've got the right side up. So the first thing that we're going to do is find our notch on the side here. I've got one just there and one just there. And we're actually going to fold this, just move my pin further down so we can work on this. We're actually going to fold the fabric over so that we've got right sides together on that match point there. The other thing that we need to do as well is we just need to turn up 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to pin that towards the top of the pocket so it holds that straight for us, because then the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to press up 1/4 of an inch there, and then we can reposition our pin so it's about half of what was turned over in total. Can't see it very clearly on here, but that's my fold line just there, look. So that's, I've turned up the hem there. And then that's the fold line on the top where the notch is. And do the same on the other side, because that will neaten that edge for us to make sure that we're all nice and neat. Okay, so we've got this pocket here. That's my pin marking the right side, and then we're going to just stitch down here. And then on my pockets, this is an extra tip, I then follow that same seam allowance down here just through the single layer of fabric. So I'll start and stop, go backwards and forwards and come down, and then I'll then stop here, pivot, and I'll show you how to pivot because that's an important skill to have. Across here to the point, pivot again, across here, and then back up here again and cut. And that will give us a line, a nice even clear line to fold over to of stitches, so that when we're making these pockets we can make sure they're as neat as possible. Okay, so let's do the other one. Let's get that one's ready for us, and just move this pin here to make sure that it's out of the way of where we're wanting to work. That's interesting, we've got another little slub on our fabric there. Okay, we're going to work with it. So what we're going to do here is we are going to fold over at the notch point, so identify where your notch point is and fold that over, and then just put a pin towards the top just to hold it. And then on the other side we're going to do exactly the same, and if you've got a check or something, that should follow that line straight across, which mine does. And then the next thing we're going to do then is fold up the bottom edge up to meet those pins, but only half the distance that it was before, and then just resight your pin to hold that edge in place. Put the pin in this side. Okay, so now we've got two pockets that we are pinned and ready to go. Because we now know which side we're working on, I'm going to take out my pin mark in the right side, because we know that when we turn these the other way round, then that will delineate the right side, which is the right side and wrong side, so then we'll be clear for going forward. So that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine. Oh, too high. So let me take this over to the sewing machine, and we will then get these stitched together. Okay, so I've got my machine lined up, and I've got some coordinating thread in my machine. The rule of thumb is that if you haven't got an exact match, then choose the one that's a shade darker, because that will show up less than one that's a shade lighter. So that's the general rule of thumb on general stitching. And what we've got is we've got our ordinary presser foot, and we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around this pocket. So line up your presser foot. I'm going to use the outside edge, this inside edge here where my foot changes from metal to plastic, and that gives me a nice 1/4 inch seam. So I'm just going to line my machine up. We're using a straight stitch here. If I can find my pedal. And we're going to hold on to our threads, because we need to hold on to our threads so that we don't make a nest underneath our stitching. And when we're sewing with small pieces like this, sometimes they can get a little bit stuck. So don't go too fast and too zoomy, because you might need to help it through a little bit. So take your time on this. If you've got a speed control, then you can always turn the speed control down, so that makes it better for you. Especially on using these smaller pieces, we need to be quite accurate. So again, we're going to take a couple of stitches forward, couple of stitches back, just to set that seam, and then we might just have to just pull on our threads just to help it through. And then I'm going to put my needle down in my work. Use your hand crank if you need to on the side, which is this bit here, and just always finish with your needle in your work, because that will help you as you're sewing. So now we're going to keep our 1/4 inch seam down towards the bottom, and then we're going to stop about a 1/4 inch away before we need to change direction. So for me, that's about there. And then I'm going to leave my needle in the work and lift up my presser foot and twist my work, and I can check that and see where we are on the 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's pretty good. And now we're going to end up, if I wasn't quite right, I can put the fabric back again. Because it's anchored by the needle being in the work, you don't need to worry about it. If you'd got your needle up, this would go all over the place if you were trying to stitch it. So again, put your needles down in the work, and now we're just going to go across the edge here with the presser foot. So we're about a 1/4 inch away from the point, which I think will be about there for me. Presser foot, so needle in the work, presser foot up, and we can twist again. And I can line that back up with this side. I'm happy with that. So then we'll start moving across, and then we twist again, pivot again, and then we can then come back up this side here. So I've got my finger on where my pin is as well, because we're going to have to take my pin out, but I don't want to lose the folds in my fabric. So wait till I get a little bit closer. My needle will stay in my work, and just move my pin out of the way. And then we're going to just reverse at the top here just to hold that together. Take the needle out of the work and snip our threads and our beginning threads. I have got a bin over this side here, and that's what we're left with. So we're left with this stitch in here, so that hem there's been held down. We've got the start and stop here where we've reversed, and then we've got these stitches down here which are going to give us a guide for where to fold this pocket so that it's nice and neat, and then we won't get a variable edge to it. We'll get a lovely nice crisp edge, and I'll show you how to fold these sections here so you don't get bits folding out on the side. So let's go ahead and do this on the second pocket, and then we'll be able to move forward and get this pressed and turned around the right way. Okay, so now we've got two pocket pieces that are cut. The first thing that we're going to do is just this little bit of extra here. I'm just going to trim that little bit off, so it's just a little bit of the seam allowance off the edge. So I'm just taking that off, not going beyond the fold because we want to keep there. And then at the top of this corner here, I want to trim that off as well. And you're only taking off a small amount, but if we see our stitches are just here, I'm just a few threads away from the corner. And again, we're going to do the same here. So I'm just taking off excess of that seam allowance to make, because it's going to make it very bulky when we turn this. And then I'm just snipping this corner off here as well, just to make that a little bit easier to turn. So let's just do that on the other one too. You can't cut it all off in one go because otherwise you're going to lose your corners. So do this in two separate moves. And literally we've just got some really tiny pieces that we've just taken off, so literally just smidges, but they do make a difference to when you're turning. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to turn this corner through. So you're going to put your finger inside the hem, and then you're just going to help ease that top of that pocket back. And then what I like to use is I've got something called a seam gauge here. It's looking a bit battered, but it's got a nice little rounded corner there, and I can pop this into the corner here, and that will just help that corner come out and just be nice and neat. If you've not got a seam gauge, you can use the edge of a knitting needle, but just be careful not to put too much pressure on because you will go through your fabric and make a hole if you're not careful. Just make sure that's going to stay up. Could have pressed that first really, I suppose, but we can press it up to make sure it stays under when we're on the ironing board. Or you can also use a little pin, and just use a pin and just to ease out these threads here. But just be careful you don't get too enthusiastic and pull all your threads out, because you'll end up with tufty corners, and we don't want jeans with tufty corners. Okay, so once we've got to this stage here, I'm going to take this to the ironing board, and I'm going to make sure that hem is ironed under like that, so there's no raw edge showing on the pocket. But I'm also going to fold in on the stitch line the edges of the rest of the pocket. I'm not going to worry too much about the corners at the moment, but just make sure that you've pressed in all of these edges where we've just stitched round through the single amount of fabric, and that will help us when we're setting our corners. So let me just go to the ironing board and do that. Okay, so let's just iron this. Let's just iron that hem down first. Just watch your fingers. You might have a mini iron that you can use. They're very handy. So that's got that nice and flat. And now what I'm going to do is just fold in these edges. So I'm just going to fold it back until I locate where those stitches are on the edge, and then I'm just going to hold it down and just put some heat on it, and that will just help that just fold in. We can, if these stitches show at the end, we can always unpick those and just take those out. You can always just go to the other side of these so you can just see these edges, and then we can fold those in. So here, where the side seam is, if we fold that bottom edge in first and then fold that one in, we know we're not going to get any raw edges near the edges of our pockets. That's a good fold. But down here, we just need to do something separate. So let's just do this one again. So fold that one in again on that line. Just give it a bit of heat to hold it. Just be careful if you're working so close with your garments and you've got a burst of steam, because you will scald your fingers. And on this one now, we're just going to fold one side in, and then we'll fold the other side in, but we need to make sure that we've not got anything on the raw edge. So on here, just make sure that tucks right in nicely, and that the raw edge here is away from the edge that we're going to sew in the end. So again, just put some heat on that, and then we turn it over like this. Make sure our edges are under nicely, and we can give that a fold. I just want to go in just a little bit more. Little fiddly, but it's worth getting this right, because as we know, your eye is drawn to pockets on jeans. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, and we're just going to press the other one in exactly the same way. So you can just see that by using this method, we've got two identical sized and perfectly pressed pocket. So now we're going to move over to the sewing machine and do some top stitching. So I've got my 2 pockets, and we can have a look in the book, and Sarah has done a suggestion of how to decorate this pocket with going down into the corner to the point. And I've actually put some orange thread in my machine, and I'm going to have a go at stitching this with the orange thread because I think the contrast thread could look quite nice, and you'll be able to see that too. So just making sure everything's all nicely all sewn down. I'm just going to line up my presser foot with my machine. Presser foot with my fabric, sorry, with my machine. Honestly. Words sometimes. And we're just going to take it nice and steady. I'm just going to take the stitch up to a 2, just a slightly bigger, to a 2.6, as that'll, I think, look nice. I'm just going to take a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, just to lock that thread in, and I'm going to go right the way across. So I'm following one of the lines on my fabric, and I'm going to stop just a hair's breadth away from the edge. And then I'm going to now angle my presser foot towards the point on my pocket here, and we're going to sew down towards the pocket, towards the point. When we get there, we're just going to stop, and then I'm going to sew back up again to the other point. So I'm just angling this and just eyeballing where I think that line should be. Top, I'm just going to reverse a couple of stitches just to lock that off and take this one out. Trim my threads. We can see we've got the little markings on the jeans pockets, and then these are going to be stitched down further down here. So let's just do that again on this one. So we've got 2 identical pockets. If your fabric doesn't want to move because it's just small, just give a tug on the threads at the back. Not a big tug, but just pull on them. A little bit of pressure, and it'll just help it through the machine. Let's make sure we get to that edge. About there, and then we can pivot. And aim towards the point of the pocket. Going to then aim back up again towards this top corner just here. A couple of stitches back just to lock those threads and take those off. So at the moment we've got 2 pockets with our triangles on. I've got a little bit of a loose thread there, just get rid of that now while we can. But at the moment we've not tacked down any of these raw edges on the sides here, but that's fine, because we're now going to go to take our pattern piece here, which is for our legs, so we can take our pins out. We know we've marked everything on here that we need to give us the clues for building this up together. So let's pop our pattern piece somewhere safe. Now we know that when we open these out, the right side, because we've got our pins marking it, is on the inside, so we can fold that out. And then what we can also tell is we've got our pattern placement for our pockets. So what we're going to do now is take one of our pockets and one of our pattern pieces, and we're going to line up the top corners of the pocket with the 2 topped tufts of our tailor's tack, and I'm going to put a pin in towards each of those corners. So my pin heads are in the centre of my pocket, and the edges of my pins are pointing out towards the edge. And I'm also going to match up the point on the bottom of my pocket with my final tailor's tack. And again, I'm going to now use the pin and point it down towards that point. Once you've got that in place, you can add any extra pins you need in order just to hold the seam allowances in place for you for whilst you're working. Just be aware that you're making a bit of a star in the centre of your pocket. Doesn't want to go through that pin, doesn't it? Okay, give it a twist if it doesn't want to go through. So there I've got my pocket all, so I can stitch down here towards the end, and the heads of my pockets are out of the way. Sorry, the heads of my pins are out of the way. Now that we know we're putting the pocket onto the right side of the fabric, we can take that pin out marking the right side because we'll know what is the right side going forward. So let's just pin the other one in place, and then we've got this one. So this is our mirror copies, and this is what you can see about the mirror copies. Our tailor's tacks are showing us that when we sew that seam together, those pockets are going to be together. If we'd have sewn just done 2 pattern pieces 1 and 2, we'd have had 2 pieces like this, and the pocket would have been far away, and that wouldn't have been correct. So mirroring your pattern pieces is really important. As you'll know, if you watch my videos, I bang on about it all the time. So again, let's just match up the top of the pocket with the 2 tailor's tacks that we've got, and then a pin going out to those corners. And then we're going to match up the bottom of the pocket with the tailor's tack at the bottom there, and we're going to put a pin going down towards the bottom of the pocket just there, holding that still. Once that's in place, I'm just going to add a couple more in just to keep these other corners down and nice and flat. And then, as I said, once we've done that, we can take that pin out marking the front, because we know the pockets will be on the front, and that will show us which is the front of the garment going forward. So I'm going to use my top stitching thread again, my orange again, and just top stitch through here. I have got grey in the bobbin, but that's okay. And so we're not going to stitch on this top bit because we want him to be able to put his carrot or whatever else he might want to put in his back pocket. And we're going to start here. Now, when I start on pockets, I tend to do a stitch down, but then I pivot and go up at an angle. So let me just get my, where have I put it? Where's that all gone to? So I'm just going to get my awl, and I'm just going to show you that I just do a triangle shape here in the corner, which just fixes that. Then we're going to come down the side here, quite close to the edge, not 1/4 of an inch in, only like 1/8 of an inch in. We want a very slight seam, and then pivot here and along. I'm going to keep my awl handy in case things start to get tangled up, and I leave my tailor's tacks in case we have to undo this stitching for any reason. Then we don't have to go back and put our tailor's tacks in again. We'll take our tailor's tacks out at the very end, and I'll show you how to do that. So have your awl or something close by so it's an extra help when you're using the machine. Hopefully you could have seen all of that. That was all low enough. So I'm going to move my needle on this stitch so that it's far across to the left here, to the right, sorry, because that's going to hold this pattern piece down in place. I'm going to start at this top corner. So just have to get your eye into where you're looking at. I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see close up with this. So it's very precise. I'm going to take a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back to set that. Then put my needle down into my work, and now I'm going to go across at an angle and then back again across the top of the pocket, just for that couple of stitch or two. And then we're going to then go down this side. Take our pins out from our star as we go. Don't want them to get in the way of where we're stitching. Right on that corner. And then twist. Sew down the next edge. Taking our pins out as we go. Don't sew over pins if we can help it, because it does mess up our machine. If you're a beginner sewer, then I would suggest you don't sew with the contrast thread at this stage. I would suggest you sew with a coordinating thread, because although the stitching won't stand out, it'll leave you less room for error, and you'll probably be happier with that. Or if you press for time, then I wouldn't use a contrast thread either. And again, we're going to do that little triangle, so a couple of stitches this way, and then twist it again, leaving the needle in the work just to pivot. Give us that impression of that jeans pockets give us, and then we can have a little look. I think I've done a little bit wrong on one corner, but I can undo that if I want to. Show you. Okay, so that's what the pocket looks like now. So we've got our top stitch in the corners, and we've gone down this side here. It's just gone off slightly, but hopefully it won't look too bad. And then along the edge here, across and up again, and over there. Once we've finished, we can then take out our tailor's tacks. So I think I'll leave mine as it is. I think in the overall scheme of things you won't see it. If any of your tailor's tacks don't want to pull out, you can try from the other side as well, but sometimes it means they've just got caught in the stitching, and what you do then is you just then snip close to the edge on one side, and then you can locate the stitch on the thread on the other side of your stitching. Mine's actually in the pocket. And then if you give it just a little pull, it'll come straight away for you. So again here, let's pull on these and see if we've got any stuck. Yes, this one, oh no, it's not stuck, that's fine, that's all okay. And then on this one as well, they should just all pull out. If they don't, you can try and ease them from the other side, give them another tug, and if they don't, then as I say, just cut them close to the edge. In this case, I think it'll be inside the pocket, and they should then just pull straight away for you. It. So there we go, there's a lovely neat pocket. Let me get on and stitch the other one. Okay, so we've got our two pockets all nicely sewn on there and looking nice and symmetrical. And then what we're going to do now on each leg is we're going to prep the hem. Now I'm not going to sew my hem just yet because I think this is going to be wide enough for us to sew it on the sewing machine later, but I do like to prep my hem first. So we're going to just turn it up by 1/4 of an inch, and then we're going to then turn it up a little bit more. Let me just check in the book, see how much it has to be turned up by. So she wants to 1/4 of an inch to the wrong side, and then a further 1/2 an inch to the other side. Okay, so we're going to go 1/2 centimetre, 1/4 of an inch up, and then we're going to fold it over so we've got a double turn on that hem. So I'm going to do that, just take that over to the ironing board and just press that on both sides. I'm not going to sew it, I'm going to press it so that that memory is in there for the seam, for the hem, and we're going to do it later because I think it looks neater if we sew it when it's in the round. If it's a bit of a challenge and you want to sew it in the flat, then you can just top stitch this across now, but I think you'll get a better result if we do it at the end, so it's up to you. So we're folding this 1/4 of an inch up and then another 1/4 of an inch up to the wrong side of your pockets. Okay, so let's just go and do that on the ironing board. So let's take this hem here, just press it nice and flat, 1/4 of an inch, a little bit of steam if you've got some. My iron needs filling up with water, and then a little bit more. So you've got a double hem on there. Just gives it a bit of steam just to hold that flat. While we're here, we might as well just press our rest of our trousers and just make sure that's nice, and press our pocket, make sure that's all nice and flat. So let's do the other one. So let's turn it up by 1/4 of an inch. And then fold it over again and by 1/4 of an inch. But what that does is when this is cooled, and I just move that to one side so you look on this one, is it's given us these lovely fold lines on this cotton, so we know that when we can work with this now, and that fold will be remembered when we come to sew it up. Taking each leg at a time, we're going to match the point here at the crotch seam here. So put that on together, and let's put a pin in at right angles to our seam so that they're out of the way. And just remember, this bit here won't match because one's the front and one's the back, so don't expect those curves to match. And then on our seam here, we're going to unfold our hem, and then we're going to match our seam points here at the bottom of the hem together. Now there is some shaping down the bottom of this hem that we can see on the pattern piece here. So the hem, so it goes in at an angle like here, coming into the inside, and then it starts to go out again. That's to mimic when this is turned round, that edge there, and then this bit here is straight, and that's actually the hem there. So you do need to remember to put that shaping in when you're cutting it out. If you follow your pattern though, you're fine because it's on there already. But when we're sewing it, we need to remember that shaping as well. So now that this seam is lying on top of each other, all just nice and flat, I'm just going to put some pins along just to hold that in place for me whilst I'm sewing, every couple of inches or so. So we've got right sides together, so your pocket should be on the inside at this stage. So again, pocket's going to be on the inside, match your crotch seam on, this is on the other leg now. And put that together, and this is where we're going to form the actual legs for the trousers. Make those in the round, unfold the hem, pop those together and match that, and then we're going to then just pop some more pins in going up the sides here. Use as many or as few as you're happy to do, but I do suggest matching up your front and your start and stop point, because if they should match, and that'll make it easier for you when you're going forward. So just going to take this to the sewing machine. I've changed my threads now to all grey. I'm just going to, with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, start and reverse here and go all the way down, and then reverse here just to hold that together, and do that on both legs. Move my needle back into the middle, and on a straight stitch as well still. Hold on to your threads when you start. Reverse. Needle in your work before you take your pins out, and then you won't pull your work across out of the way. Make sure everything's all nicely folded out straight. We're going to come down now, and then we're going to put the stitch 2 and then pivot to come out to the side and then down. Get the pin out and then reverse at the end. Needle up and take our work out. So there we've got, and take our threads off at the start. So there we've got our 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down, and we followed the line of this stitching and the shaping down here. So just go and do that for your second leg as well, and then we'll go to talk about neatening up these edges. What we have here is we have our 2 legs all nice and neatly sewn, but we've got a little bit of fraying on the edge here, and that will continue to fray. So what I suggest we do is that we neaten this seam off now whilst we're working with it. And we can either use something called pinking shears, which are these scissors here, and what they do is when they cut fabric, they put a zigzag into the fabric, which gives you what's called a bias edge. So these little bits here might fray off, but it's unlikely to go beyond the indentation of that zigzag. So that's a nice, quick, easy way if you want to do that. The other thing that we can do is overlock it. If you've got an overlocker, just run down it with an overlocker, or if you've got a zigzag stitch on your machine, then we can zigzag. And I'm just going to, for ease, I'm just going to zigzag these for now, because that does a nice finish. So I'm going to just pop this into my machine. I'm going to change my stitch to the zigzag one, which on my machine is a number 8. And I'm going to use a width of 3 and a length of 1.5. That's what I found works really nicely for these clothes. So that's a zigzag width of 3 and then a stitch length of 1.5. So just going to start on the edge of the fabric I'm doing both sides together. So both raw edges of the fabric are being zigzagged together to make one seam. And you can stop and pivot if you want to. I'll just twist it through the seam, just twist it around the seam. And then what I do is when I've cut these threads off, is if you want to, you can just go and just trim up these little whiskers that just appear on the edge. Because once you've got rid of those, you shouldn't have any more fraying after that point. So the zigzag just sits on the edge of the fabric there, edges, and just holds those threads together so that they can't fray. That's all that I do. And that then keeps that all nice and neat then going forward. Obviously you can be as careful as you like trimming that off. So let me just go ahead and do the other one, and then we'll talk about turning these round. Okay, so next time we've done that, once we've neatened all of those, we're going to take one of the trouser legs and we're going to turn it so that the right side, so your pocket, is on the outside. Just turn that one through all the way down to the bottom. So we've got one piece now with the pocket on the outside, and we've got one piece now with the pocket on the inside. And what we're going to do is we're going to match those two pockets up together, so the pockets are lying on top of each other. And then we're going to poke the leg, one of the legs that's the right way round, inside the leg that's the wrong way round. So poke that down, grab it from the other end, so that it's sitting inside the other leg. And your side seams here should match and be in the right place. And the best way of doing it is to have your pockets on top of each other. And then what I want you to do is just put a pin from the inside here at a right angle towards the edge of your trousers. Then go across to the other side and match the edges there. So we're matching up the edges of what's going to go around the waist. And then when we've done that, we can then reach inside, and then I'll push one seam allowance one way and one seam allowance the other way, so that makes it easier to sew. It's called nesting your seams. And then we're going to put a pin in just there as well. So that's fixed those two trouser legs to each other inside. So it looks like we've got one in effect on our work surface, but we've got the waist seam at the top, at the front and the back matched. And if we open them up, we can see that both pockets are on top of each other, just like that. Okay, now the next thing that we need to do is locate. If your character's got a tail, we need to locate where those notches are, because the notches indicate the back of the garment. And I'm going to put a red pin in here. I'm going to do it from the inside because I'm going to sew from the inside. That's it. And then we're going to then put another pin where the other notch is, because that's our start and stop points for leaving a gap for our tail. Now I've just had a thought, we might be better actually just neatening this seam before we start to stitch. Thinking it through. Yes, let's do that first. Sorry folks, it's good practice for lining things up, because I think that's going to be fiddlier once we've finished. Just take your trousers outside of each other again now. And just before we sew that thing, just neaten around here the edges. Now, if you are doing a pinking shears, don't take anything off the actual width, because we'll use the points of the edges as being your seam allowance, so that we know where we are with it fitting. Okay, I'll just do that. Hold on one second. Just fold your fabric out of the way as you're stitching towards it. There we go, that'll just stop that from fraying, won't it? And we can work with it to take off some of the whiskers. I don't want those. Because sometimes it can have a tendency when you're zigzagging to fold some of the seam allowance in, so you just need to be aware of that, because we need to keep the seam allowance true if we can do. so that we don't alter the fit of the garment, especially on when it's as small as this. Let me just do the other one and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so I'm back again. I've just zigzagged these seams just for putting together and just taken off the whiskers. So back to where we were again. I've still got one leg the right way round with the pocket on the outside, and I've still got one leg with the pocket on the inside. So the one with the pocket on the outside, we're going to push that all the way down inside the other leg. And we're going to line it up once we've got the leg down, so that we have our pockets on top of each other. And then we're going to put a pin at the top of the waistband here, which is be the back waistband. Let's make sure that's lined up at the top. Put a pin in. And then we're then going to put a pin at the other side of the waistband, at the front waistband. Pin that together. And then we've got our seam allowances here between the legs, and we're just going to nest those together. So I've got the seam allowance of one going one way and the other one going the other way. It isn't essential, but it just makes it sit flatter. And then I'm going to put a pin in from the inside to that point too. Oh, the pin go through, give it a little twist if it won't go through, and normally that helps it. Now on the back here where the pockets are, we need to just remember where our notches are, and I can see I've got one there and one there. So let me just measure down from the top for you in case you've lost yours with zigzagging. So the top first one is 2 inches down, and then there's about an inch in between. So that's what we'll do. So we'll do 2 inches down. So I want my red pin where my stop start point is. You know, I've used this colour coding before just to remind us. And then I'm going to use another red pin where that stitching can start again. That's all going to line up nicely. And then again, we're going to match these seams lines up again here. I'll put a couple of pins in there. So just be careful. You can see here I've got a little bit of a stretch here where I've zigzagged that edge. It looks a little bit longer, but if you flatten your fibres together, you should be able to get that to sit together. If you're in doubt, do what I call split the difference. So have half of your excess one side and half the other, because at least that keeps it even to the point that you're sewing to. And then as we go round, those will flatten out. We've just got to be careful not to pull, because we're on a bias edge, that edge will stretch more than it will do if you're on straight of grain. So what we're going to do now is just take this to the sewing machine. I've still got grey thread in. And we're just going to sew now with a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down, all the way round, and we're going to just roll the garment towards us as we sew. I'll show you how I mean that. So I've got my threads in there. I want to be off my zigzag stitch. I've done that before, started again on my zigzag stitch, which isn't good. Okay, so and my needle's in the centre so that we can have that seam lined up nicely. So just start and stop and reverse. And then I'm going to use my needle down button again, sorry, my hands are in the way, in order to put the needle down in my work, so that when I'm sewing, it will just, it'll keep at my place for me. So again, using whatever marker you need to keep to your 1/4 inch seam allowance, we're going to sew to the red pin. So we can sew quite close. I've just got like 1 or 2 stitches to do more, and then I'm going to reverse and just lock off my stitches at that point. Needle up, let's trim our thread. So I've only done that couple of inches down on that centre back seam at the moment. I've just sewn down here just to there, and I've stopped. And now I'm going to find my other pin, which is by my other notch, and I'm going to open again. If you don't want to leave a hole in the back of your trousers for a tail, so I've got a bunny tail on my characters, then you can just carry on straight away down with this. You don't need to stop and start. But if you want to have somewhere to poke a little bunny tail through, then you need to leave the gap. So just kind of manoeuvre your fabric so that it's lying nice and flat where you're wanting to sew. And then threads out of the way so we can hold on to those so we don't get a nest underneath. And we're kind of straight onto a curve, so it's going to feel a little bit fiddly. But so take our pin out, because we don't want to sew onto our pin, but we're sure where we are. A couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, just to anchor those threads. Now, needle in your work, really important. And then what we're going to do is now I'm going to just roll the trouser leg forward, so it's going to pick up at the back. But what we want to make sure is that for this next ½ inch or so, it's flat in front of the presser foot. And that's important to make sure we don't sew any puckers into our work. So again, just maintaining that seam allowance, just sew towards your next pin and stop. I'm going to take that pin out. And then I'm just going to roll the fabric again further forward to me, so I can just make sure that that next ½ inch is flat with my fingers. You can feel underneath, a bit like when you're ironing, you can tell if there's a crease underneath. Same with this with your stitching. And then we're going to sew a little bit further forward again, keeping to the curve for between the legs, and then we're going to take that next pin out. But then we're going to just roll the fabric just slightly towards us again, unfold it as it goes, and we can see where we're going next. So smooth it out in front of you underneath that edge, make sure there's no puckers. And then we're going to then sew following round that curve. If we need to leave the needle in the work and pivot, we can do to get round. And again, I'm going to do a little bit more before we then take the next pin out. So I'm just moving my fabric across as well as we go. A bit on the pivot. Next pin out. Just flatten that sewing, just make sure it's all nice and we're happy with it. And then we'll sew a little bit more. Take the pin out, just make sure we're nice and flat, and then towards the top, take the pin out. And I'm just going to reverse at the top, and then we've got our seam sewn from where we rejoined. Take the threads off, do that as we go along. And so that's what we've got now. We've got this seam sewn all the way around here, all the way under between the legs, and then we've got a little gap in here in the stitching where the tail will go out, and then we're off towards the top here. So all that needs to do now is to actually just turn both legs now, all the trousers round the right way, and that takes it out of the other leg, so they come out. And hey presto, we have a pair of trousers. This is what they look like. So there's the front of our trousers there. 2 legs, always a good thing on trousers. And then there's our back with our jeans pockets on the back there, and we've got a little hole here which is for the character tail at the back. Now if you wanted to, you can top stitch these. You could do a line either side of the stitching here in orange if you wanted to. You want to be folding that seam allowance back so that the tail can poke out. And then just go through and round if you wanted to. It might be nice to do that actually. I might do that on mine just a bit for a bit of decoration. I think as I come between the legs though, I'm going to switch and just put the seam allowances to the one side and then just come up one side, because what I might do is just draw a mock fly on the front of these jeans, which would be quite interesting, I think. You don't have to, obviously. If you wanted to, you can just press this open. And then the only thing that I would recommend you do is just sew around this opening here, just like that, just like a box, and press it first so that those edges stay nice and flat, because that will stop the seam allowance here coming through, poking through when the character is wearing the trousers. It'll just hold those back and hold those still. But I think I'm going to do some top stitching on mine just to elevate it, make it look a bit nicer. I'm just turning these jeans out, inside out, because that'll be an easier way, she says. Easier, I might regret this, but an easier way to do that top stitching. I'm going to do the back seams open, because I need to open up and neaten around this edge here. But then as we come round to the front here, I've had a look on the little box of shorts that I made and the false fly there, and it goes across towards my window. So I'm going to do the same with this one. I'm having the fly across towards the window. I am going to sew up the front there, and then I'll then come back and do a little bit of a curvy stitch just here, just to denote that that's where the fly goes. But that's what I'm going to do, so I'll just do that now. Okay, so I've just finished the top stitching, so I'm happy with the top stitching down the back and around. That looks like it's a jean seam, and I've gone through between the legs here. But then on the front here, where I've done the fly, I think that what I am doing is I'm going to unpick this stitching here, and I'm just going to leave it to where it is between the legs, and then just let it go to a single line of stitching on the other side. So I'm just unpicking this now, just quickly, because
I just changed my mind. And that's the thing, we can make these design decisions and then we can then change our mind if we want to. But in this case, if I just quickly just unpick this, and I can show you how to pull the threads through so we don't have to put this back in the machine and we're not going to get threads that keep unravelling on us. So I'm leaving quite a long length on my unpicked seam, and I use the back of my seam ripper to take the stitches out, because if we use the front we run the risk of it falling against the blade which sits in that little V there, and I don't want it to cut the fabric, cut the thread, because I want to leave that nice and long. So I'm just going to take this out just until we get to the end bit, and then I'll show you what to do. Won't take a second or two. Thank you for your patience with me while I'm just doing this. Just being very careful to only get the thread that I'm stitching with and not to catch any of the fibres from the trousers. That one doesn't want to come, does it? Let's go on to the inside instead and give it a little tug from the inside. Sometimes the threads just get caught. There we go, that's eased it off. In actual fact, we're probably about where we would want to stop anyway. Maybe a little bit more. Just use the back of your quick unpick so it doesn't snag. Just where we've had to navigate round this curve, I think it's just taken smaller stitches which then don't want to come out quite so easily. Obviously it has just broken slightly, just the tension on the thread, but we've still got long enough to tie in a knot, so I'm not going to worry. I'm just going to stop at this under leg, between the leg seam, crotch seam. So one more. Okay, so we've got a long orange thread on this side, and then on the inside we'll have a corresponding long grey thread. And what I do is I just pull on the grey thread, and can you see the loop of the orange thread come through? And you just get your quick unpick and just put it through the loop, and then just ease that thread through to the inside. And that gives you a really neat finishing off point on the other side, and gives you these threads here. Put the quick unpick down so we don't make any damage on our garment. And then we're just going to take these two threads here, and then I'm going to knot them 3 times. Just by hand, just quickly. 1. If yours is quite small, you can always use your quick unpick just to get hold of the little thread underneath and pull it through, and sometimes that's easier than with fingers. I've done that several times myself. And then a nice tight knot, and then I'm just going to cut those off, because it's not construction, it doesn't matter if it does come undone, but those 3 threads should hold that together on the 3 knots should hold it together on the inside. And as we go to the outside, that's what we've got on the outside. It could have perhaps been a little bit wider, but it'll give the impression of having jean stitching on it, so I'm quite happy with that. The other thing that we could do while we're here now is, we remember our hems. We're going to just fold our hems over where those memory folds are, so once and then again, and put a pin in, and we're going to top stitch this in orange too to give it the effect of jeans. So again, it's folded over once, and this should fold really quite nicely on those existing fold lines that we'd already got. Just make sure it's all tucked up, and it is. So that's one. Let's do the other one. Because the thing is that if you sew these hems, if you'd already sewn the hems flat, you then get this bit here sticking up. The seam allowance sticks up on the inside of the leg, and it's just a look I don't like. I mean, often you've seen when I've hemmed my trouser, I then go back and just put a couple of stitches just to hold it flat. But as I say, it just depends on how you prefer to finish yours off, but I certainly don't like to have that seam sticking up, seam allowance sticking up. So let's just fold these over again on the existing fold lines, and because we've pressed those, it literally does, it almost wants to curl over at that point. Make sure it's nice and even. Rid of threads. Threads get everywhere, don't they? My husband says he can tell when I've been in my sewing room because there's a trail of threads following me as I leave the room. Okay, so that's all nice and neat there. So what I'm going to do now, because we're going to sew this from the inside, so I'm just going to turn these legs inside out because that'll be much easier to sew it. And I think you've got enough room. It's going to be fiddly, but you've got enough room to stitch it, so it's not too bad. And we're just going to use that same rolling forward technique that we did when we were stitching on the waist. Let's do the other one as well while we're here. Just be careful you don't lose your pins or stab yourself in the process. Pins can be very sharp. Okay. We can just make sure that these are turned through quite nicely as well for us. Okay, a bit of a pucker on that one, but that's where the seam allowance is, so I just need to be aware of that. So just making sure that that's all folded all over all nicely. That are nice and even as well. That seam allowance is not behaving. Let's just turn that the other way. Feels like it wants to sit the other way. That's better. So we can help it on its way with that. Okay. So all I'm going to do now is put this into my machine. So I'm going to start at the centre in the middle of the legs where the centre seam is and start there. Now it might be a bit thick, so just take your time with this. I've still got my orange contrast thread in the top, and now we're going to just top stitch this hem here. So just be aware you've got pins in the way. So just line up where you want your hem to be. Hold on to your threads. I'm going to just make the stitch length a little bit longer. I'm going to do 2.6. And a couple of stitches forward just to anchor those threads for me. It's literally almost stitching on the spot. Then your needle down in your work, and then we can start and twist this forward. So all we're concentrating on is that the front ½ inch or so in front of the needle is flat. I'm going to hold on to my thread so I can help that pull that, just not tug it, but just ease it through with a little bit of pressure if it gets stuck, because we've got a bit of a bump just there that we had to get over. And then when we start, we then just roll it forward towards us. Then we keep going a little bit more. And then we then just roll it forward towards us and take our pins out as we go. This is going to put the orange stitching on the bottom of his jeans for Alfie. And as I say, I've just got gold thread in the top, and then I've got a mustard, but an orange mustard coloured thread in the top. So just keep folding that forward and just keep stopping, starting. And then the aim of the exercise is to sew back over where you started, so keep your ends out the way. Identify where your stop-start point is, so that for me is just here. And now we're always going to be aiming our needle at that point there. And then just reverse stitch a couple of stitches and needle up, and then we can take our threads off. If you want to pull them through to the back and knot them, you can also do that. That makes a nice neat finish. But there we've got our top stitching on the hem, and the grey's holding that down. Okay, let's do the other one, and then I'll come back to you. Just finished stitching the second one, so let's just turn these around the right way now and have a look and see what we think to the stitching on there. Oh yeah, that looks okay. Looks like a pair of jeans, I think. There we go. So we've got our 2 pockets, we've got our top stitching down the back, holding those seam allowances out of the way for the little bunny tail. And then on the bottom of our trousers as well, we've now got the jean stitching at the bottom here as well. So it's looking like a pair of jeans. There we go. So next we're going to be working on the waistband of the trousers now that we've got our fly all stitched and our hems all done. And we can take our pins out of our pattern piece. Put our pattern piece somewhere safe. And then again, because we've marked the right side of our fabric, we know which way round our fabric goes. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we sew with the sides where the 2 notches, there's 2 notches at the bottom just here, and there's 2 notches just there where my pin is there. And we're going to lie the 2 pieces together so that the right sides are together, and so that those 2 notch pieces, 2 sets of notches, match each other. And then because we've got the right sides together, I'm just going to use one of these pins to just hold that together for me. Then I'm going to use the other one to hold the other side together for me. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just stitch down these seams here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, double stitch at the top and double stitch at the bottom. And that's going to start the waistband off for us. So let me just change back to my dark grey thread because I have my orange in, and then that's what I'm going to do. And then just do the other side. And we need to use the same seam allowances on these that we used for our trousers, because otherwise this isn't going to, the waistband won't fit. But I'll show you what we can do if the waistband doesn't fit for some reason, and that will hopefully be a little tip for you. Oops, threads everywhere. Okay, so we know that when we put this on to get onto our waistband, that the side with the notches will match up here. So we know that that's the back because we've got 2 notches, and we know our seam allowance here is going to go against the seam allowance at the back here. And I'm deliberately doing this trial run before we actually press the hem allowance up, because I want to make sure that this is actually going to fit and do any adjustments before I start to do anything else. So let's just pop the front waist seam, and you just open up your seam allowance, finger press it, and then you're matching it up with the seam allowance, with the edge of that seam on the centre front. Yeah, that's going to fit just nicely, look. So I can see that there's no, excuse me. So I can see just by pinning that half that that's all lying really nice and flat, and that there's no bubbles of fabric anywhere. So you can match up the notches and they match nicely. If you'd have used too much seam allowance on one of these, one side would be too tight, and all you'd need to do then is on your waistband is just undo the stitching, and then if it's too loose you're going to take a slightly wider seam allowance, so you're going to then perhaps bring your seam allowance in a little way. But just remember, whatever you come in on this side, you actually remove twice the amount from your waistband, because you're sewing through both layers, so it takes out that same amount on both pieces of fabric just here at the same time. As well, if your waistband is too tight, then you can undo the stitching and then just sew your new waistband line just further out into your seam allowance. But as I say, if you're fairly consistent, then you should be able to match it up pretty well. And I can see that does on mine, so I can carry on with confidence now. Because if I was going to change it, I would change the waistband before we got to the other bit. And because we've done that on both sides, then both sides should be equal, so that's fine. So next thing I'm going to do now is take this to the ironing board, and then the side without the notches, so identify where your notches are, and mine are here. There's one notch there, there's another notch there, and another notch somewhere else on here. There's one there, and 2 there, that's it. I've got 2 there, honest. Probably just there. This is what I'm saying, sometimes when you're doing your notches, you don't go far enough into your fabric, so just be aware of that. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to neaten off this edge. Now I think Sarah does have you turning in a certain amount, and it's up to you. If you want to do that, you can do. You've just got to be careful to catch that amount when you're sewing. But if I neaten this off, then that can just sit inside the jeans anyway, and I don't need to worry so much. So that's what I'm going to do with mine. So let's change it to a zigzag stitch again, and I'm going to use my 3 width and my 1.5 length. Hold on to my stitches, and we're neatening the side that hasn't got the notches on it, so it's the opposite side to the notch side. So leave your needle in your work if you have to stop and rearrange anything. Seam allowance, just finger press it open so that stays open for you. You can hear the death rattle going on in my sewing machine for my bobbin, so I'll have to wind another bobbin, but we're not far off finishing, but I'll probably need some more. So that's just neatened that edge up, and I can just go around now and just trim off any whiskers that I've got sticking out and just neaten that off, making sure that I don't snip off any of the threads that I've just stitched on my zigzag stitch. As I say, that should just control that fraying for you, just so that it's not going to be a nuisance for you in the future. Or you can turn up 1/4 inch if you want to, and just have 1/4 inch turned up. It just depends on how you want to do your jeans. Okay, we'll just pull those threads. Okay, so I'm just going to, that's the 2 notches there. Where's the other one of that one? Oh, it's there, look, I can see it. A bit bigger so I can see it. Okay, so what we're going to do then is going to take our jeans. I usually start at the back. So you want the section with 2 notches here and 2 notches there. So 2 notches either side of the seam allowance, and then that seam allowance gets matched right up on top of your seam allowance for the centre back, and then you're going to pin it. I'm going to pin it from the inside. Okay. And then what we're going to do then, working around this way, probably easier for you to see, is then going to match up our notches on the outside here and put a pin in. Oops. That's it. And we can match up our centre front as well, so we know how much we're easing in. So match that bit up. And put a pin in. I'm putting it in, pinned in from the inside because I think it'll be easier to manage the fabrics if I pin it from the inside. And again, we're just matching up notches, and this edge, as I say, should sit directly on top of, if you match your raw edges together, should match on top of your trousers perfectly. Sometimes you can smoosh some of your fibres together, or just gain an extra millimetre or lose an extra millimetre if should you need to. So like here, that was a little bit extra, but we can see that I can smoosh those fibres down, and when I actually sew that, it should be fine without any puckers in. Just move that a little bit along there. We do know that smooshing is a technical word, don't we, as well? So yeah, I'm just going to carry on pinning round these trousers, making sure those raw edges are matching up without pulling anything out of place. And it all sits beautifully. So if at this stage yours doesn't, just go back and just alter your seam allowance on your trousers here, either centre front or centre back, and just take account of that and just make it all so that it all sits all nicely. And then all we're going to do now is take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew from the inside. I start at the centre back as well, and then we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, reverse at the start and stop, and then just sew all the way around. And that will attach the waistband onto our jeans for us. Just make sure your seam allowance is sitting flat. Hold on to your threads. Oh, I'm still on a zigzag. reverse stitch at the start and the end. Needle down in your work when you stop and just roll your trousers towards you and just take your pins out as you get to them. And just follow the contours of the waistband. It just does undulate a little bit, just ebbs up and down a little bit, so just follow those as you can. Seam allowance need to stay flat. So if it starts to fold up, just lift up your presser foot, use something just to swipe underneath and hold it down. And just roll your trousers again forward towards you so that they lay flat underneath, lie flat just underneath where you're going to be stitching. Just stop to take your pins out. If you try and take your pins out on the fly, that's where you'll tend to wobble. It's tempting to do it, but then it does affect the fit and the finish. So. Just double stitch on the top there, and threads out, needle out of the work, and snip our threads off. And then we can have a look. And then what we can do is just push this waistband up, and we can trim off any little threads we've got and just finger press it up so that we can see that that waistband is fitting nicely. Yeah, that fits really nicely. And then the next thing that we're going to do now is take this to the ironing board and press it, and we're going to press all the seam allowance up inside the waistband, and then when I've done that I'm then going to fold it over like this so that the waistband then sits on that sewn edge and then is folded back down inside the trousers. So we'll just go and do that. So when you're pressing small garments like this, it can be a little bit tricky to get inside them. But all I've done with this one is just coax the seam allowance out towards the waistband here, and I'm just using the nose of my iron just to get inside there, just to press that flat. But the other thing that you can do when you want to press from the outside is use something like this. It's a sleeve roll, tailor's ham, and that will then has a narrow enough edge that it can just sit into the garment like this, and then you can just press it from the outside just to make sure that that seam allowance is fully pressed up, because you can see here it's just folded over slightly. So I just want to pull that apart just so we get the maximum width that we need for when we're sewing this. And just keep turning it round. And I think I'm going to use my orange thread again to top stitch this waistband down, because I think that'll look quite sweet on here. Obviously if you're a beginner and you just want to use a coordinating thread that you can't see so much, then absolutely you go ahead and do that, because you've just got to make it easy for yourself, or if you're up against time trying to get presents done for Christmas. And then what I'm going to do now is where that join is there of the waistband to the trousers, I'm going to fold it on there. And I'm just going to put my sleeve roll back in again, and right where that fold is, just going to pull those edges apart, and then I'm just going to press with my seam iron again, and that will just give that a nice folded edge and just make sure it behaves itself for me. So I've got a nice hot iron. If you're using a pure wool fabric for making these trousers, do remember to use a press cloth. I've got the silk organza one here, because a press cloth will allow you to see through, but it'll take the heat of the iron, so you won't get those shiny scorch marks onto your fabric. So that's a really good tip to have. You could use a tea towel, you could use a handkerchief, not a tissue handkerchief, a fabric handkerchief, or just an offcut of a thin linen cotton lawn or something like this. This is pure silk organza, which is the very best to use, I have to say. And you can just buy a metre of that fabric, which is available online. I think I just got this from eBay. and then I just overlocked the edge, or you can zigzag the edge, and it just gives you a press cloth. And as you can see through it to see exactly what you're ironing, what you're pressing, in order to make these trousers as lovely as possible. Okay, so I'm happy that that's all pressed down now. So what we're going to do now is, probably working from the inside, is we're going to find a place to start, probably centre back actually, and then we're going to start and stitch. Now I'm going to start and stitch and leave the seam allowance open, because we need to be able to thread our elastic through for the waistband. So I'm probably going to start and stop there, and then we'll come back and stitch that afterwards. And I'm probably going to sew quite far down actually, so we'll have a look and see where the narrowest part of my waistband is, so that we can keep it nice and consistent going round. Maybe as much as half it, because I've not folded under, you see. You could fold under your edge, and if you folded under your edge, you'll have less to play with than I have, in which case you'll need to be right on the edge here. But because I've just zigzagged mine and left it inside, then that gives me quite a nice deep bit of elastic then, channel to make. So let's go and make our channel for our elastic, and then we can thread that through, and then we're nearly finished. Right, I'm definitely playing bobbin chicken with my bobbin, and because I'm actually sewing, because I've got the orange thread on top, then I need to turn my trousers inside out and sew them from the top side, so that I get the orange on the top. So I'm just going to do exactly the same as we did when we were sewing the waistband on. I'm going to put my needle down into the work. I'm just going to move my needle across to the left side, because I think I've got more room than I think. And I'm just going to start it so that the stitching starts just on that top stitching line. So a couple of stitches forward, a couple of back, needling my work. And because this is all beautifully pressed, as long as I make sure that that's lying flat underneath, then we should be fine without having any pins. But use pins if you want to. Just roll your trousers forward and just follow the same edge. So we're just coming up here, and I need to leave a gap between these edges, enough for a safety pin to get through, and we'll join that up later. Just snip our threads off. Oops. And we can see that I'm comfortably within the edge of the waistband there, so I'm not too concerned about that. So let me get some elastic, and we'll be threading our elastic through our waistband in a moment, and then we're about done. Okay, so I've got my elastic here. Sarah recommends a piece that is 9 inches long. So I just line it along the top of my tape measure and just snip it off at the 9-inch mark. And then what we do is I use my tubs, my takeaway tubs. We don't have that many, folks. I know it looks like I have lots and lots of takeaways, but I don't. And then finding a little pin, one that will fit through the channel very nicely. We just then use the pin and just go through the elastic. I usually go through twice, but you can do whatever you like. So that goes through there. It will sort of fold back as we go through, but that should be fine. And with these little gold pins, you have to be careful that they don't open up as you're pushing through. So basically what you do when you're threading elastic through is you take the head of the elastic, and then you go into, not the head of the elastic, the head of the safety pin, and you use that really as a indicator. So you push it in into the hole, and then you start to push your fabric on top of the head from either side, and then you can pull on the back of it, and it should pull your elastic through with it in its wake. But if you're too rough with it, your safety pin will open up inside the channel, and we don't want that to happen. So again, we're just pushing the fabric using our fingers and our fingernails till it's bunched up, and then if we pull on the back here, it's pulling the elastic through, because the pin's through here now and the elastic is here. The only thing that I would recommend you do is take a pin, and whether it's a safety pin or whatever, just secure down the end of your elastic, because you'll be surprised how quickly it all pulls through. And as soon as you start to get some tension on it, if you're not careful, you pull the free end of your elastic through, and then you have to go chasing after it, or you have to pull the elastic you've just spent the last 10 minutes just threading through out again so that you can start. The other thing that you have to be careful of is when you come to your seam allowances at the centre front and centre back, because that creates a little pocket that the head of your safety pin can get stuck into when it's going round and through that section. So just be careful of that. I've made this channel quite tight. Nothing like making things easy for yourself, is there? So what I tend to do is if you kind of put pressure on either side of the seam allowance, you can quite often give yourself a way through that works. And you'll know as soon as you get through. It goes a little bit tight just there, but looks like we're through. So that's worked for us this time. But it will get a little bit tight for your elastic, so just take your time, don't get frustrated with it. Because as I say, if that pin starts to open up inside, then you do get a little bit annoyed when you have to take it all out when you've just threaded it all through, because it'll thread through perfectly the first time until you have to take it out, and then you'll struggle with it the second time. I do anyway, that's usually how it works for me. But see how this is all bunching up nicely at the back? So we can just smooth that along, and it just pulls the elastic through for us, so we've got a nice clear run. And again, just bunching that elastic on and then moving it along. It's a bit like a caterpillar, isn't it, walking along? Just take your time and just ease it round. We're getting there, we're nearly there. So I hope you enjoy my videos. As I say, if you're new to my channel, then I do a lot of Lunar Lapin videos, but I also do dressmaking videos. So I'm hoping to do some children's wear at some stage as well, because I absolutely love making children's wear. So I'm starting off on the Lunar Lapin ones just to give you plenty of content to get going and get your teeth into, but then hopefully we'll get on to some children's dressmaking as well, which might be of interest. There are some dressmaking videos for ladies on the site already, because I make some of my own clothes, so while I'm sewing those, then I record the process like I do. And the videos are very, very similar to the Lunar Lapin videos, very much step by step. It's not about fast sewing on my channel at all. It's all about taking your time and getting a really nice result. So if you're a speedy sewer and you just want to rattle through it and you're not bothered about the outcome, then this probably isn't the place for you. You might find my videos a bit frustrating. But if you actually want to take your time and get a really nice result, then hopefully I can give you some tips and tricks along the way for that. Anyway, we're back to the beginning again. So the pin's just poking out through the hole here. So what I'm going to do now is hopefully help that to come through. Back out again. Okay, we've got a little bit of extra elastic here, so don't worry too much. And what we want to do now is we're trying to join these elastics so that they don't have any twists in them. So the first thing I do is just take the elastic off the pin, put the two ends of the elastic together, and then I do put my pin back in again while I check that we've not got any kinks or any twists in the elastic. So all I do to do that is just run my fingers along the channel here, and you'll be able to feel if there's a hard bit where the elastic twists over. If it does twist over, then all you have to do is just use your fingers just to manipulate it so that it lies flat. But as we can see, that's all, well, hopefully you can see that's all lying flat, and that's coming out of there flat and coming out of that one flat, so I'm happy. So once we've done that and made sure it's all flat, then we pull so that we've got a couple of inches spare out of the garment, and then we're going to overlap these by just putting one on top of the other, only by about a centimetre or so, and then I put a pin in there just to hold that together for me, because now we're just going to join these two bits of elastic together. So it doesn't matter what colour you use. I'm going to use red because I'd got too much on my needle before from when we were doing the Tailor's Tacks, and I'm just going to do a rather large over stitch. You can put a needle, a knot in your work if in the end of your thread if you want to. But I'm just going to over stitch this. Just nobody's going to see it unless you've got a sheer fabric that you're using. Obviously, when you're making the French knickers, you need to, and you're working with lace, you'll need to be a little bit neater than this. But on these trousers, especially with the thick, if you're using a thick chambray or a denim or a quilting cotton that you can't see through, then you should be okay just to use whatever thread you want. So just a few stitches, just to over stitch this. Just checking that you can see what I'm doing, and I think you can. A couple of stitches in the middle, just to anchor this thread. There we go, and then I can just snip that off. That should be enough to hold it. Put the needle out of the way. And then what we have to do then is pull on the elastic, because you want to pull that sewn section in through the waistband. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of manipulation depending on how much room you've left. But if you kind of pull on your elastic, that should help pull it through as well. A little bit of poking and cajoling tends to work with it as well. And then what we're going to do now is, once that's in there and out of the way, is we're just going to go back to the sewing machine and we can just rejoin this up. If you wanted to try it on your character now, let's get Wilhelmina here. Come on, Wilhelmina, you can try on Alfie's trousers. Wilhelmina's got slightly twisted legs, bless her. Oh, that's the wrong way around, isn't it? So we'll just try these on just to make sure that these fit before we sew it up. Otherwise it'd be very annoying if we've already sewn it up and they don't fit. So yeah, they feel like they're going to be fine. And there's room for her tail just to poke through. Just pull these up for you. So there we go. Oh, they're quite a long length on her, so just be aware of that. But I think that's so that when she's sitting down, that they're at the right length for when she's sitting down. So just be aware of that. They look quite long. They'll pull up a little bit more. If you wanted to, you can go and take another hem, but you have to be aware that when the characters are actually sitting down, the legs do go up slightly. So unless you want him to look like he's got crops on, I bet that's why Sarah's left these a little bit longer. And once he's got shoes on or what have you, it won't be so bad. But yeah, I'm happy that those fit on the waist. Okay, let's see his pockets nicely. So I'm going to take these off now. Come on, Wilhelmina. Pop those to one side. Oops. And then all I'm going to do is just make sure this is nice and flat, take it to the sewing machine and just join up those two sections of stitching just to neaten that off. Try not to go through the elastic. You don't really want to sew through the elastic if you can help it. So just a couple of forward and backward stitches just to finish that off at the back. So there we are, we have a completed pair of trousers, complete with orange back stitching on the pockets. The waistband is neatly sewn on. We've got our little slit for the tail to come out. We've got our mock fly on the front of them as well. And I'll post here, there's a video to the boxer shorts that I made as well, using the French knicker pattern. And I went into more detail about how to do this mock fly on the front there, so I'll link that video because I think I skipped over it quite quickly here, thinking whether I was going to keep it or not, and that will give you more details on how to do that. So if you just reference that video for that, that'll be great. And then I think all that needs to happen then is that on Alfie's picture in the book, I think there's a button. Yeah, there's a button sewn here, and also you can top stitch around the top as well if you wanted to. Sarah has top stitched around the top there before you do the rest of it. It's up to you. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave I've already put my elastic in. So but you can put a button on there if you want to, especially if you've not done the mock flyers. That'll tell you what is the front and back. But doing our legs the way that I said as well, with sewing them after we'd sewn the inside leg seam, has just made that a much nicer finish there, rather than the seam allowance sticking out through the bottom of his trousers. So yeah, I'll just round up with you.
So there you go, folks. There's Alfie's jeans, all made all nice and neat and coordinating with his lovely waistcoat. There is already a tutorial on my site and video how to make the waistcoat, and also how to make Alfie's shirt as well. So that, although this has been done in this lovely pink gingham, then this is Alfie's shirt as well. So there's already a video of how to do that on the channel to make this complete outfit for your character. So I hope you've enjoyed watching along. There's Alfie's tail just sticking out and the stitching on the pockets. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you have enjoyed it and you like the way that I explain things, as a lot of people do, the feedback's been excellent, I must admit, on my channel, then please consider subscribing. I welcome everybody along. If you also hit the notification bell, then when I upload a new video, you'll be notified by YouTube that the new video's gone live. I can't guarantee to do one every week, but I do try to do weekly at the moment. And at the moment on my channel, we're concentrated on the Lunar Lapin clothes ready for Christmas, so that if you're gifting any characters for Christmas, then the outfits are already there for you to have a go at making. Because whilst you might be used to making the character itself, then the clothes sewing might be new to you. But all the tips and tricks I give you are directly transferable through to adult or children's sewing as well. So you're learning skills for life. It's not just for making these little characters. And believe me, if you can have the patience to sew on this small scale and get a good finish on these, then you'll have no problem at all sewing for children or for adults as well. And over time there will be more videos as well on my channel for how to do that type of sewing, because that really interests me, and I love that kind of sewing as well. So I've hoped you've enjoyed it today. Please subscribe if you think that you would like to see more of my content. If there's a particular outfit or a particular character you want to see made, then you can sponsor a character with me. There's a link in the description below the video to my Ko-fi account, and I'll pop it just here for you as well. And what that does is it allows you to make a donation to me, but then I keep that money and pop it in a separate little jar, and I use it then to buy the kits directly from Cool Crafting when I'm back in the UK, where I can do. Obviously I don't always buy the fabric, because I've got a fabric in my stash that already will suit the character then, or the outfit, then I'll use that. But I certainly haven't got any fur or things like that for the skating coat, that kind of thing. So it's just an idea. If you wanted to sponsor a character, and then when I do the tutorial for that garment or for that character, and you've sponsored and donated towards that, then I will put you in the credits for the at the beginning and at the end of the video, just to say thank you very much, and to let everybody know that you've made that video possible for me. Because with the best will in the world, I can keep making these outfits as much as I like, but there comes a limit when my bank manager tells me that I need to just slow down a little bit, and that's what I'm just trying to anticipate, and hopefully you don't mind supporting me in that way. Thank you for being here. Have a great day, everybody, and I hope you enjoy making your jeans for Alfie. Take care, everybody. Bye.